I'm on the Calm app. You can use my voice as one of your guided meditation options. There are literally people falling asleep to my voice around the world right now. So I'll just back up. I'm a facilitator and I'm an educator and I'm a consultant. One of the frameworks that I use in my work is this thing called design thinking. And it's especially good for really complex and ambiguous problems.
How do we take what you do to help people solve interpersonal conflict at home?
If you get cash out of an ATM, does it give you your cash first or your card back first? It gives you your card back first, because otherwise you and I and everybody else walks away with the cash and forgets our card every single time. There are all these different behavioral design things that are intentionally designed into spaces, and we can use some of those same concepts, I think, in our homes. In your work, if you want to optimize your home for relationships, for connection, for whatever, like, you can do physical things to the space to make that happen. Having a TV in the living room, all of a sudden then the interaction in the space is centered around that. That's the default. What if we make the default interaction with each other and the opt-in, setting up the projector and connecting the computer to watch Netflix or whatever? How are we designing space for our desired outcome, our core why, right?
John, welcome to Home Therapy.
Thank you.
I'm such a huge fan of yours, and I need to even clarify what you really do. So we'll dive into that first. But I'm just, obviously a huge fan because of what you do on the Calm app. But
Thanks.
when I took a deep dive into your background, it's very fascinating. And that's why I wanted you to come on and share that with us.
Well, hey, before I do, let me just say, such a privilege to get to be a part of your pandemic experience, hopefully for the better. It sounds like for the better. But I also so appreciate that you reached out, because, the funny thing is, as you kind of alluded to already, I'm on the Calm app. I am a meditation guide there. So I have these meditations. You can use my voice as one of your guided meditation options. And actually, it's funny, I joke, but also not joke with people in sessions like this sometimes. There are literally people falling asleep to my voice around the world right now. I hope your listeners aren't among them. We'll try to keep it entertaining and lively here. But it's such a cool thing and a cool platform to be on. But the ironic thing is, of all the things that I've done professionally, that's the one with like the widest reach, the most users, but it's the one where I've had the least connection with those users, because, I've recorded these things, but then people out there in the world are using them, but I don't see them. I don't get that feedback. I'm not like they are present with you in the room. So I love it and so appreciate it when people like you reach out and we get to connect. So thank you for that.
I do understand. It feels like you're in those London red telephone booths where
Right.
it's kind of a vacuum, but
Right.
I know if you helped me, like you said, there's so many people that you've helped just by your voice, which is so powerful, isn't it?
It's so cool. It's such a privilege, and it's a little surreal. It's funny, it's one of those funny things. And I'm happy to share too more about how that all, when it came down.
Well, since we're already talking.
Sure. So I started meditation when I was a kid. My parents practiced meditation, and so learned that from them, and have had a meditation practice for, I don't know, 25 years almost. I'm not that old, but I'm 37, but have had meditation practice hey, well, it's all relative, but yeah. So I've had a meditation practice for years, and admittedly varying degrees of consistency. And it's not like I've meditated every day for the last 25 years or something, but I had this practice. And I was at a dinner party in Oakland where I was living. It was like 2014, and I was at a friend's house, a bunch of people over. My friend was talking to a friend of his, and then he, like other corner of the table, he called over to me. He's like, "Hey, John, you should talk to this person. You meditate a lot." I'm like, "Yeah, what's up?" And she was working for this startup. She was doing some work for this company called Calm that none of us had ever heard of. And she's like, "Yeah, we're looking for someone with a nice voice who has a meditation practice."
That's you.
Yeah. I'm like, well, hey, I have a voice. I don't know if you think it's nice or not, but I have meditation practice. Sure, let's talk. And actually, I thought, so I've listened to some of your earlier episodes, and I think it was Mikkel Welch you had on, something that he said that resonated with me. He's like, yeah, early in your career, but really throughout, just saying yes to different things because you never know where they're going to land and where where it's going to go. And that's among other things, one of the things that I've tried to just continue to do when I'm able, right? So this was one of those situations. I was like, sure, why not? I'll send you a recording of my voice. So I recorded some things on my phone. I emailed them over to her. She emailed back being like, hey, we like it. Like my boss likes it. Do you want to come into the studio? So we went to the recording studio. They A/B tested me on the app, and there's a bit more to the story, of course, but the long story short is now I'm one of the people on this Calm app, and I get the privilege of people listening to my voice to meditate. It's a super cool thing and a cool platform to be on. And the one thing I'll add too, which is maybe it is more related to my real work, my real day job, is I'm also lucky to do some workshops and some like B2B facing learning programs through Calm. So they have, of course, you as an individual can sign up for their platform and use the app, but also they will sell basically subscriptions to companies. So like everybody with a, google.com email gets a subscription. And so with that, then Calm also provides some different kind of B2B offerings. So learning programs, webinars, I do sessions on sleep, mindfulness, burnout, stress, psychological safety, all these different things for the company side. So fun stuff.
That's just
Yeah.
incredible. And I'm so happy you did say yes because
Hey,
we get to
thanks.
enjoy your work
Yeah.
and your calm effects.
No.
It's so fascinating. Every person I talked to so far on this podcast didn't start out their journey saying, this is what I want to be, or this is what I
No.
want to do. There's always these quote unquote happenstance, but really
Yeah.
it's not,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
there's never really a true coincidence in my opinion. But I want to dive and delve into your parents because I
Oh,
have 3 kids and my sister and I joke that we just got the double whammy. My mom has anxiety, my dad has
oh my
anxiety. It shows
God.
out in different ways, but we had the double whammy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then with my kids, I can see undercurrents of anxiety.
Mm.
How did your parent, like, what are their backgrounds? Do they have professional backgrounds or they
Oh
just
yeah.
were
Yeah.
interested?
I mean, my dad, well, he's retired now, but he was a computer scientist and my mom was an educator. So,
Okay.
it wasn't like they weren't just sort of yoga
They weren't
doing.
like super psychologists or things like
No,
that.
no, no. And I'll tell you what, so I have, you said you have 3 girls or 3 kids?
Three
Okay.
girls.
Yeah. So I have a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. And whoo, baby, let me tell you. So 2 under 2 until recently. And let me tell you, this mindfulness practice is serious. Like
You're in the trenches.
I am
You
in the
are in the
trenches.
trenches.
And actually, as it relates to the home therapy and all these kinds of things, so my wife and I was chatting with her last night. I was like, yeah, I'm going on do this podcast tomorrow, and we're talking about it, and we were like, wow, within a 3-month period, we both got new jobs. We moved and bought our first home and had a second kid who was, which was the second under 2. And oh man, survival mode, let me tell you. So just having those moments of let me pause, let me breathe, let me be present, and yeah, having that practice has been been pretty important to me.
Oh, wow. Especially the ages as well, it's almost like having twins, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But
And my wife is a twin. I'm like, hey, I'm sure it's not as hard as twins, but there's any way you cut it. I don't care if your kids if you have one or if you have several and they're years apart. There's just any way you cut it. It's a whole different set of learnings and growths and challenges. So it's beautiful. And I'll tell you what, I've had to put into practice some of the things that I help other people do in my work. I'm like, oh gosh, gotta take your own medicine now.
what's one go-to quick way to balance yourself out? Because I know I can be very emotional, and the
Mm-hmm.
first thing that I want to do is react back to
Yeah,
whatever is dished to me.
yeah.
So, do you have a quick little tip of how you rebalance yourself in those moments? I know
You
it's
know,
really hard.
just a pause. Like if I can break, as you said, the reactivity, there's, the trigger, and then there's my reaction and behavior. And like you're nodding, you're smiling, because especially as a therapist, like just a pause in that moment. And it's not even like, hey, you need to do something, you should do something differently here right now, John. It's more just, let me notice, what am I feeling? Like whether I'm explicitly naming an emotion or a feeling or reaction or behavior, whatever, but just pausing. And then it's like, okay, here we go. The other thing that comes to mind for younger kids like mine, kids like 2, 3, 4 years old, even, they actually just need your help physically with emotional regulation. My instinct is like, you messed up, kid. Like, here's a punishment. But actually, literally, can you hug them and just help them emotionally regulate their body? So, I'm working on these things.
It's it's a work in progress for all
Yeah,
of us. Just
yeah,
to give
yeah.
you a preview, I have an 18-year-old, 15-year-old, and 10-year-old.
Oh, wow.
And when they're like under two, it's more about physical um, security and development. But by the time they're in their, tweens and teens, it's more about emotional regulation and helping them develop their interpersonal skills, their communication skills on a
Mhm.
near adult level, right? Where we're reaching to that goal at least, which
Yeah,
adults are still, I'm sure I am reaching, still trying to reach for those.
yeah, yeah.
I really appreciate the pause
Mm,
because I'll own it. I especially when I'm, being triggered. It's
mhm,
so easy for me to just react and
mhm,
want to fix it, either fix the situation, problem solve right away,
mhm,
or reject, like, no, be
mhm,
defensive.
mhm, mhm.
So I am going to maybe put a post-it note. And
Yeah.
in my mind, it's going to be like, John says, take a pause.
Yeah.
And that's going to help me because for me, and maybe some people, this is why I like therapy, is it helps to have another voice to
Yeah.
guide you. And I think that's why I love my experience with the Calm app
Mhm,
and with you
mhm.
is like, because the voices in my head are way too chaotic and loud, and I need like a guide, or like a leading voice that's not
Right.
emotional, that's not reactive. And I
Well,
think going back to parenting, that's the same. Kids need that.
yeah. And I think to your point too of a guiding voice or something that's not just the voices in your head, one of the ways that I like to think about this is like, what are the external structures we can put in place to help design our own behavior intentionally? Right. So if, in your work, if you want to optimize your home for relationships, for connection, for whatever, like you can do physical things to the space to make that happen. And if I'm thinking about interpersonal relationships, they're, whether physical things or things that move the dynamics, like we can put intentional structures and routines and things in place that are external to us. It's not just me having to choose every time, hey, pause, or hey, calm down, or hey, like stop scrolling, whatever. It's actually putting that choice outside of my body and outside of my control, and giving myself the nudge, right? From a behavioral economics perspective, we would think of these as nudges. Like, what are the little design choices? It's like you enter a building. Do you are you met with elevators, or are you met with a stairway? Because it turns out whichever one you're met with is the one you're more likely to take. And as an architect or as a designer, you can then design that to encourage a more active behavior, let's say, right? So there are all these different designs, and I'm just like, all right, John, you don't have the willpower, you don't have the, the grace or patience to do all these things right. How can I choose in advance so that I don't have to choose in the moment? And I love thinking about that, and it's actually somewhat related to some of what I do with teams and organizations. Is like, how do we create great team structures and designs so that our human dynamics are effective, so we can do effective work together? So it's super cool stuff, and I love it.
What I hear from you is that intention
Mm.
is the primary force when we are designing something. Obviously, in my work, it is. But could you share more about your work?
Yeah,
Are you helping architects? Are you helping builders? Who comes to you for
yeah,
help?
yeah. Thanks. So It's interesting because my work and your work have, I think, a lot of overlap in like some of the underlying elements, but actually the application is super different. So I'll just back up. I'm a facilitator and I'm an educator and I'm a consultant. And one of the frameworks that I use in my work is this thing called design thinking. So, most broadly, I help teams and organizations work together more effectively, more productively, and with greater purpose. And I've done that with college students at Stanford University for a number of years. Um, and I work with all different sets of companies doing this kind of stuff. So, one of the frameworks that I use in my work and that I use with colleagues in my work is this thing called design thinking. And design thinking is an approach to creativity and innovation and problem solving, and it's especially useful for human needs and challenges. So, like anytime there are humans involved and emotions involved, this can be a good approach. And it's especially good for really complex and ambiguous problems where, like, maybe we're not even sure what is the problem we're trying to solve. What are we trying to work on? This is a good approach for situations like that. So we can think of it, another term for it, or kind of adjacent term, is human centered design, and there's a long history of that. It comes out of product design. So if you're designing actual things, like if you have a microphone there was a whole team of product designers creating that microphone. And part of their process was understanding users' needs. Like, what do you, Anita, the user of this microphone, need? What are the design criteria and constraints through the human elements of those user needs? And then taking those human needs and actually designing something technologically which suits those needs, which has viability from a business perspective and is actually feasible to create. So in my work, I'm not on the tech side per se. I do work with more the human and team side of things. So just as two examples, like recent examples, last week, probably a lot of your listeners, and I imagine you may use Pinterest, right? So I was working with a group from Pinterest last week in San Francisco, and I'm not there working with the computer scientists. I'm there working with people who are working with, say, HR or their people team, internal components that helping the teams and the company do more effective work in collaboration. And with these groups, it's like helping them get clear what exactly are the needs and challenges and problems we're trying to solve. What are our important OKRs? Having an approach to that and really clearly defining and framing those effectively, and then going through a collaborative process together to actually get the work done in an effective way. So that's one example. But then I mentioned, that this design thinking is a really good approach to these complex or ambiguous, like really, really challenging problems. So another application, which we kind of alluded to before, I taught a course at Stanford for a number of years, a well-known course called Designing Your Life. And that's just taking the same creative approach to problem solving, to innovation, and taking these I guess steps, the framework and process, but applying them to this really, really complex and tricky and shifting, ambiguous problem of what do I want to be when I grow up, and helping students and professionals explore that and understand it even better. So, we can talk in more detail about some of the component parts, but I hope that's kind of a helpful start. So that's how I apply this process and framework.
Thank you for sharing, and it does clarify so much.
Mm.
I almost feel like you're a therapist in many ways
You know
for
what?
them.
I have no therapy training, so and I cannot claim to be a therapist. However, I will say almost every group I've ever worked with, whether it's like high-powered executives or students, almost every single group you work with, the biggest driver or constraint to them doing effective work together is the interpersonal dynamics and having a good working collaborative process to get stuff done. And so, yeah, I do a lot of human things. I'm not in
Human
there
problem
like,
solving.
yeah, I'm not in there like, flexing my CBT muscles or something, but um, but I am helping people think about, yeah, and use effective processes for collaboration and innovation.
So I'm really curious because you have so much experience in again human problem solving.
Mm.
I would love to get your take on members who are living at home
Mm.
and they have impasses, but it's coming out in the design realm. So the kitchen's not working for them, or two kids fighting over a small bathroom, or partners. I have a lot of partners fighting
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
a one sink in a bathroom. I mean, I'm going to admit, even me, like yelling at my kids for not cleaning up. How do we take what you do to help people solve interpersonal conflict
Mm.
into something that's more like at home that
Yeah.
you would
Yeah.
recommend?
Love the question. So there are a few parts to it. First thing, just as far as like, maybe somebody's at an impasse, a couple, a family, a person, an individual, whoever it might be. There's so many different angles to take. And you know this as a therapist, this as someone who does interior design and works with all different kind of people. But a few things that come to mind. So one is, I mentioned when I work with teams and companies, a big part of what we do is just helping people get clear about what is the problem we're trying to solve. And I believe I've heard you talked about this as like what a core, tell me the term
Yeah.
you like.
A core desire.
Core
Yes.
desire,
Your
right?
why.
So
Mhm.
what's your why? Exactly. So actually, I'm just going to be like plus oneing what you think here. But let's say I'm working with a company and they're like, return to work. Everybody's got to be back in the office. And we're like, okay, let's hold up for a second. What problem are we trying to solve? And it's like, well, we're trying to solve the problem of getting people. And it's like, oh, no, hold up. Why? Can we ask why? And consider more broadly, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Well, we want more effective collaboration, better camaraderie, better productivity. So, okay, cool. Let's think about how might we facilitate greater productivity, greater camaraderie, greater connection. Guess what? One of the answers to any of those could be returning to work in person fully. However, that's just one answer of many. And so if we can get clear about what is the underlying why, then we can really do more effective problem solving where we're not already anchored on a solution in the question itself. Because it's so common. It's like, yo, Anita, I need your help renovating my kitchen. And it's like, okay, cool. And I'm like, I'm stuck on the tile. I'm stuck on the sink. I'm stuck on all these things. Okay, hold up. Let's back up. Why? Why do you want to reno the kitchen? Well, my partner and I want to have the kind of space where we can host, where we can feel at home, where we can, be energized. Like it's like, okay, cool. You know what? Renovating your kitchen, that's one solution. And there's some other things we could do. So that's the first thing that comes to mind is getting clear on the why. Specific tools and some of the specific things as related to design thinking and some of my work with that. There's some different kind of component parts of this process. And the first is empathy, like really deeply and clearly understanding human
Yes.
needs. Now, that can be tricky if it's myself in my home. I might need that external perspective, like you're talking about, right? But how can we take some empathetic approaches to understanding that why and those human needs? Like what are the needs? What are the problems that need to be solved? Then we can get clear about what is it? We're defining the problem to be solved, and then really coming up with a lot of different ideas. And one thing I'll note from a decision-making perspective, something that research shows that actually many of us, I think most of us, have this tendency to opt toward like binary either or decisions, like should I do green or white? And it turns out that we make more effective decisions and decisions we're happier with if we introduce at least a third element. So
Okay.
at least, and it could be your kind of bifurcating the either or, right? It's like I either reno my kitchen or I don't. And it's like, well, you could reno it in this way or this other way, or you could not and do nothing, or you could not and do this other thing with those resources and time, right? We just turn two into four, and actually it helps expand our thinking and it helps us make more effective decisions. And maybe we still make, in the end, it could be we still make the same decision we would have anyway, but with greater information and a better perspective about it. So that's one thing, right? Once we've had all those ideas and we've had a good process for decision making, well, one of these components of this approach we've been talking about, design thinking, that I use a lot in my work is prototyping. Now, prototyping, it's like, how can you do cheap, quick, easy versions of some of the different abstract ideas, right? You're like, I'm thinking about doing this thing. It's going to be like a $50,000 reno and it's like, hold up. Can we put some tape on the wall? can we put like literally
So like
tape
DIYs.
straight up? Yeah. Because what does that give you? It gives you an experiential and felt sense of this abstract vision that's in your head. And let's be real, I am not a home expert. Okay, like truly, I am not. But I do think in the ways that I do this work with groups, there's a lot of overlap. It's like so common to have all these great ideas, but I might be like, yeah, we're gonna do the kitchen this way, and if I communicate it verbally to you, you could understand it one way, and I could be thinking about it completely different, no matter how articulate I may or may not be.
Yes. Yes.
But as soon as we put something physical and interactive on the floor, and up in the space, maybe it's VR. I don't know. I don't have experience with those tools, but then we can interact with it and we can have a different kind of conversation. So I do think, as far as that impasse, that getting stuck or unstuck that you're talking about, that a tool like that is super helpful. And it also gets back to some of what we talked about as far as like creating the nudges, like designing in advance for the kind of interaction, for the kind of space that we want, right? So I always think of like, I don't know, what are some of the nudges that are around us? If you if you go on Instagram, you don't reach the end. Like there's unlimited scroll. That's by design
Yes.
to keep you scrolling. If you get
Mhm.
cash out of an ATM, does it give you your cash first or your card back first? Gives you your card back first, because otherwise you and I and everybody else walks away with the cash and forgets our card every single time, right?
Mhm.
So there are all these different behavioral design things that are intentionally designed into spaces, and we can use some of those same concepts, I think, in our homes. And I say that as a true novice and non-expert, but I have seen it with
No.
teams and I've seen it in organizations, and that's some of what my work is professionally.
Thank you so much for that insight. I'm the words and the notes that I'm picking up on is first, n- there's no two-way solutions. I had a really great therapist, and I remember I was in my mid 20s. I think it was a quarter life,
Yeah,
crisis.
yeah,
And I was like, there's only this way or that way, I'm like lamenting on the
mhm,
couch. And he's like, actually, there's always more than one, two options, Anita.
yeah,
And even if it's not perfect, that's the thing, is I think there's just a lot of perfectionistic
yeah,
thinking as well that we humans tend to do. It's very human to do that, right? We just want an answer.
mhm,
And there's that, for me, there's that anxiety of not knowing. But I also really loved your note on empathy. And then lastly, the nudges. I'm dying to know, what are your nudges, even in your own home, that helps
yeah,
you quell,
yeah.
whatever it is, anxiety, interpersonal conflict, or two kids under two.
Yeah, yeah. Which, oh gosh, and we love them so much, but they aren't
Yes,
under
of
two anymore.
course.
It's I
Oh,
feel
of
like I'm coming
course.
up.
I mean, I'm very real with
Yeah,
parenting, and
yeah, yeah,
people know that I love my kids too,
yeah.
but I don't know how many brain cells I have left anymore, because I think part of it too, John, is lack of sleep. I don't know about, how
100%.
your sleep routine is, but
Yeah.
when we're just not rested.
Mhm,
I'm
mhm.
assuming you aren't. I'm not.
I'm not. And today was a rough one. Last night I have this bad thing. There's a whole side note, right? It's not my fault. It's just how it is. But if I'm woken up in the middle of the night and I'm in a certain sleep cycle, it takes me forever to fall back asleep. That happened
That's
last night.
me.
The kid cried. It wasn't even a wake up. It was just like a wail in the night, and I'm awake, and I'm boom, 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 like right. And then 2 hours later, I'm still sitting there. I'm like, yo, I got work to do tomorrow. Come on. Like,
I am exactly like you.
yeah,
I feel you.
yeah.
So what are the nudges? I'm fascinated by, to me, you're a guru of um, nudges and,
Um,
design life thinking.
yeah,
So for you
yeah,
personally, how do you set yourself up for more success that way?
for sure. I appreciate the question, and you now and all your listeners will know how eccentric and strange I am. So let me just think of a few. One is, and this is just a simple one, and I think it's a concrete example of putting the decision outside of myself, so I don't have to rely on my willpower, which I have learned over time, especially on low sleep, is not strong. Um, I just keep my phone in the basement. I put my like
Oh.
7, whatever. Usually I do it before before we put the kids down, 7 p.m., whatever. I'm like, listen, I'm not trying to do any more texting. I'm not trying to do any more scrolling anymore, whatever. Put the phone in the basement, because if I see it, I'm going to pick it up and check it. Right. So it's just having a routine around things like that. Another example, again, like those nudges, like how are we designing space for our desired outcome, our core
Hmm.
why, right?
Yes.
And so we don't have a TV. It's not that we don't enjoy watching things sometimes, but we had an intentional conversation around this. We're like, yeah, having a TV in the living room, all of a sudden, then the interaction in the space is centered around that. And so that's the default. What if we make the default interaction with each other, and the opt-in, the intent, like you have to make a choose, and there's a choice, and there's some activation energy to opt into setting up the projector and connecting the computer to watch Netflix or whatever, right? So it's things like that. And then, gosh, I mean, just as far as routine and well-being, I'm kind of a fanatic about dim lights in the evening, and I like candles, and like, let me
I
get that
love that.
melatonin, don't, right? Like
Yeah.
this kind of thing. Or I have a elaborate coffee ritual in the morning where I'm like,
Oh,
listen,
share more about that because I mean, I'm born and raised in Seattle, so of
yeah,
course I
yeah,
started
yeah,
drinking coffee at 16.
right.
But share the experience. I'd love to hear about it.
Okay, we can get real specific. So I don't do this every single morning, because it'd be bad as a parent, and probably bad for my relationship. But one thing that I do often is I have this teapot. It was my grandma's teapot. She passed away not long ago, and I was like, what am I going to do with the teapot? I don't drink
Oh.
tea. And so I have the teapot. I boil the water kettle. I pour the boiling water into the teapot, and then I pour the pour over through using the teapot. And it's like, again, an intentional way. It forces me to slow down. So if I pour the water into the teapot, then use the teapot to pour the pour through, I'm just like, it's the least efficient thing. It's the least efficient way I could make coffee, but it forces a pause. And that pause, again, it's like, all right, John, this is your moment. There may be just all kinds of stuff happening, kinetic energy around you.
Hmm.
What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? And boy, let me tell you, I don't need to tell you, but coffee smells good.
Oh,
Is
especially
that,
first
yeah,
thing in the
yeah,
morning. It's my
yeah,
favorite.
right? Just having a moment to pause and be present in that sensory way, as a practice, as an act of mindfulness. And the thing about it is, then it's designed into my day. Like I'm like, I'm just tacking on this thing to a behavior, a routine I already do. I need that caffeine no matter what, right? But I could like gulp it down, or I could use that moment and just extend it a little bit, and maybe get a little more value out of it.
Well, then I'm eccentric too, then, because that sounds amazing. And all these nudges, I'm going to start using that word because there's a curiosity to it. Like,
Mhm,
it's like,
mhm.
oh, I'm going to experiment and try this.
Yeah.
I had another guest on, her name's Sarah, and she said she goes into everything new with not assuming negatively that things are imperfect, but
Mm,
like she just goes in going, there's going to be mistakes and errors. This is talking about DIYs and renovations. And I appreciated that so much because as a reformed perfectionist,
right. Reforming maybe.
reforming, I'm not, yeah, that's right.
Ongoing.
Um, it's ongoing every day.
Uh-huh.
I do tend to like, my goal is something more refined and polished and
Mm,
perfect. So, and I love how you use the word nudge because that's assuming that we don't know which way it's going to go, but this is an intention of helping me feel successful in XYZ.
this term. There's a great book called Nudge. It's one of the classics in this field,
Oh,
but
okay.
it's all about, yeah, it's all about like, even from like a macro policy perspective, what are the simple things that we can do to design for the behaviors and the interactions and the results that we want. So I appreciate that you like thinking about this too. And
I do. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share.
yeah, nice.
we're just beginning. There's just so much more, and I hope that you can find time to come back to us.
Would love to
Yes,
chat again anytime. Thank you for having me on, and thanks so much for reaching out. It just made my day when you did originally, and makes my day to make that connection here. So wonderful to talk to you, and thanks so much.
thank you, John.